episode number what, Zach? 24. Episode 24. Welcome to BramRadio podcast. It is going to be a blast today. I got my good buddy with me who is a professional skydiver here at Skydive San Diego, where we record BramRadio podcast. And look at my cool shirt. He's a pilot for Fluid Wings, which is an amazing canopy manufacturer. I'll let him talk about that a little bit more. But for all you folks at Fluid Wings, hey, man, thanks for the shirt. Thanks for Bryan. And you guys are amazing. I know you're going through it right now. Don't worry. It'll end. You guys will be fine. All right? And so with that, welcome to Bram Radio, episode number 24 with our guest, Mr. Bryan Buffaloe. Whoa!
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Stoked to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good to be here. So before we get going, let's have our listeners get an idea as to who you are. Tell us about you.
All right. Well, like I said, like you said, I'm a professional canopy pilot. I out here at Skydive San Diego. I fly for Fluid Wings. That's sort of my weekend job, my part-time fun job, the job I really enjoy more than anything
Well, your
else.
Real job's interesting. I want to get into that, too.
My real job, which I know you're itching to get into.
Yes.
I am a
for all of our conspiracy theorists that are out there. They're going to
bring on the conspiracies. It's a very unknown industry. I'm an officer in the United States Merchant Marine, and a lot of people don't know what that means. They do the thank you for your service thing, and I go, guys, you're welcome, but it's not. I'm not serving. Okay, I'm a civilian.
They hear Marine,
and they think, oh yeah, you're over there fighting, or you're bringing the stuff to the war zone. We do that sometimes, but we are civilians. Our job is to drive the bus. Okay,
right.
You guys go fight, we drive you there.
Right.
I'd be happy to go fight, but they won't let us do it.
Right.
So, merchant marine officer, basically drive container ships, car ships. I don't do oil tankers. You have to have a special qualification for that, but oil tankers as well. And we do that in the global trade industry. So that's my day job. The great thing about that, just like a truck driver, you go to work for a series of months, and then you're off for a series of months. It allows me to have this fantastic side job where I can spend most of my time, most of my real dedication is here in skydiving.
So you know what question I'm going to ask now, right?
Send it.
So everybody has seen in the news lately about there was a ship that recently hit a bridge. Now, the ships you drive, very similar, if not the same, right?
Yeah.
What happened there? First of all, the narrative is one thing. What the media says, because they're of course going to be uninformed and throwing out a bunch of, like most media, like fake news, to use a well-used phrase. And then there's what the conspiracy theorists say. You have to go far on any social media to say, don't you think it's kind of weird that, But then when you have somebody who's in the industry who understands how these ships work and understands the technology that's on them, so when I asked you the first time this is right after it happened, I was like, you had just come home and you were answering that question 1,000 times, and then the junior rank in Bramstead shows up and says, so dude, what happened? And you're like, all right, let me break this down. Do that again.
All right, I got you. So I love the conspiracy theories, by the way. The conspiracy theories are fantastic because I'm like, wow, I didn't know a ship could do that. That's fantastic. Right. That's great. All those years I've been on these ships, I didn't know they could do that. The truth is actually far more simple than you think. And then most people think, and you had kind of alluded to it earlier, it's basically this willful neglect of information that gets passed around in social media circles as well as news circles. Everybody grabs onto that first juicy bit and runs with it.
Right.
The truth is really boring, all right? The facts are really boring. But they're also rather interesting because this is where our stuff comes from, guys. Like all the stuff that we're wearing right now, all this equipment that's in the room, everything that we're getting comes from overseas, and we have to bring it back and forth. Now, we try to obviously get as many American companies as we can, but a lot of it comes from overseas. So the bottom line is essentially what happened here is a ship came into Baltimore Harbor. As that ship came in, they offload their cargo. They do American longshoremen will offload that cargo. Foreign ship or U.S. flag ship, it doesn't matter. The U.S. longshoremen offload that cargo. Then from there, they backload either empty containers or any cargo they might want to take back over to whatever country they're going to next, wherever the chartered ship is going, okay? From there, a U.S. pilot, an American flag pilot, okay, they will get on the ship and they will pilot that vessel out. Now, if we go to a foreign country, whatever that country may be, we have to pick up their pilots as well. These are local experts, captains, who know the waters well enough to navigate that ship safely in and out of the harbor. Before that ship leaves, according to 33 CFR 164.25.
Do they do? Oh, my God. All right, nerd.
That's how many times I have to write it, okay?
Easy, nerd.
Yeah, that's...
So let's say an aircraft carrier is leaving San Diego.
Yeah.
Is there a pilot on that?
There is. The Navy has their own pilots. They're trained through an organization called Military Sealift Command. Typically, for an aircraft carrier, they are Navy contracted civilians. It's a very specific group of people. I actually have a friend of mine out in Hawaii who does it for Pearl Harbor, classmate of mine. They're a very, very small group of people, but they do the same thing. They're local experts who drive those ships. They basically con those ships in and out of those small areas because they know where to turn the ship and how hard to turn the ship, how fast the ship needs to go, and when it needs to slow down or speed up. It's very, very critical in those areas. So in Baltimore, that particular ship had an American pilot on board. That pilot cons the ship, but an interesting
cons the ship,
tells the crew when to turn the rudder, when to increase engine speed or decrease engine speed, is in command essentially. Interesting caveat, however, the ultimate responsibility still lies with the captain on board that vessel. Okay, this is where this gets a little muddled and the conspiracy theories come out pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
So as that pilot was coming out, on board those ships, in accordance with our CFRs, right? They all have to follow them. There are generators on board that ship. So you have one large main engine. It's about the size of a small house. That's your main propulsion unit. Then you have three, typically on a ship that size, you have three diesel generators. Also very, very large engines, right? Then you have a fourth emergency diesel generator is the most common. That emergency diesel generator is literally exactly what it sounds. It's designed as an emergency backup power source should all other power sources fail. Now, on most ships, that's your three diesel generators that are down in the engine room and manned 24 hours a day. Okay, they're watched 24 hours a day. When you leave port, all of those generators are online and all of the main power systems are running. What happened, I am pretty sure, I'm still waiting on the reports here, but based on my experience, I can pretty much tell you, as that ship went out, the pilot ordered a rudder order. As the ship was heading out, one or some of
rudder
the
order meaning like 3 degrees left.
Turn right a little, turn left a little, and they're very specific. They'll say we want right 5, we want right 10.
Okay.
Sorry, now they say it in port and starboard because it's an international standard. So starboard 10, port 10, whatever.
Right.
When they do that, the helmsman, who's an unlicensed sailor, will turn the wheel and it'll actually turn the rudder through a hydraulic ram. Well, hydraulic rams need to have electric motors that power them. So one of those or some of those diesel generators tripped. It happens. You plug a hairdryer into your wall at home while you're watching TV and listening to the stereo with all the lights on, your breaker trips. Same thing happens on a ship. We have to provide our own power. When that happens, the emergency diesel generator automatically kicks on, or it's supposed to. So this is where when you watch the video, you'll see the lights on the ship go black. Yeah. And then you'll see them come on. And then you'll see them go off. And then the ship strikes the bridge. In that instance, what happened was the ship tripped out. It lost power. This happens all the time. The emergency diesel generator kicked on, and then it failed. Now, a lot of people say, oh, this is a conspiracy theory because of these companies, these foreign-owned companies are doing this. No, it's far more simple than that. Yeah. It's not nearly as insidious as we all want it to be. They just don't spend the money on maintenance. So that piece of equipment, I mean, we're required to test this on a regular basis.
I know airplane companies that do that.
There's a couple of them out there. There's one or two airplane companies that might have that issue. But it's the same exact problem. That piece of equipment failed, and it was because of a maintenance issue. And then as the crew tried to work to get the power back online, they just didn't have the time to get the power back online. And a lot of people will say, well, it's a foreign crew, they didn't know. Or it's a foreign crew, the parts weren't up to standard. We're all on the same parts. We all have the same standards, essentially, that we have to meet. There are organizations out there where they're getting the cheapest labor and the cheapest crew with the least experience, and one guy's in charge and nobody else knows anything. That's rare. So in this particular case, this was a ship chartered by a very, very large company. So they keep them up to standard as best they can, but ultimately this is a very expensive business. When we measure fuel burn, we measure it in tons, not in gallons. Okay?
Ooh.
So tons and barrels is how we measure fuel burn. Because it's going through about a 6 to 12 inch diameter fuel hose in some cases, where we have steel pipes that move the fuel. Wow. So in this particular case, the ship was so heavy, power goes out. The rudder already has a little bit of angle on it, so the ship's turning. A lot of people say, well, why didn't they just drop their anchors? Because the anchor only weighs about 20 tons. The ship weighs about 100,000 tons. So you can drop the anchor, but it's kind of like throwing a a weight outside your car as you're driving down the freeway.
Because I heard some guy on social media. I don't know if you guys saw this one. Because I was looking at this and I entered that into the search because I want to see what people are saying about it. Because I was trying to find the conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
And this guy's just like, I find it interesting that it was turning right, but they dropped the anchors off the left side and it's kept turning right. And so me having a basic understanding of physics, right? If I'm going to go and run into that wall, it's going to hurt. I'm probably not going through it. Basic physics.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
It's like I know that ship is super heavy and an anchor is there to help it maintain some semblance of a position, right? But when it's moving, I don't see it using. It's like the movie Battleship.
Yeah, you know? I love that movie. That scene is fantastic.
We're gonna drift a battleship by dropping anchors, right? Yeah. It's just like probably not, but made for a great movie. But this guy was like, so did they really drop the anchors? So I was like, come on, man.
So there is actually a name for this. It's called kedging, okay? It's an old maritime term, but it's called kedging.
Yeah.
Now, this is most often used in what we call a Mediterranean moor, where you back the ship into the slip, or you back it in, and then you put a gangway down or a brow down from the stern to the dock. When we say kedging, we say put the anchor down, and then as you're coming off the dock, you're pulling up on the anchor. A lot of people don't know this as well. What actually holds an anchor to the bottom? What actually holds the ship in place or holds your boat? Whatever
chain.
It is. It's the chain.
Yeah.
Because if I have – so on ships, we measure chain in what we call a shot, okay? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to get into the long and short of it, but basically there's so much chain there that the chain actually weighs way more than the anchor. Mm. So what we do is we put the anchor down. That marks the spot, and then we lay out anchor chain behind it, and that is actually what holds the ship in place. So when people say, why didn't they just drop the anchor? Well, unless they drop all of the chain, even if they did that, it's still not going to really do it. It's just going to bounce along the bottom, and it's not going to really hold.
Oh, man. So it was just generators coming on and coming off.
It was literally just a loss of power, which leads into my favorite conspiracy theory of all time. Right. They were hacked. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I loved the hack.
Yeah,
I
heard that one.
Was my favorite. All right. So if you ask my girlfriend, she'll tell you that just having a phone conversation is virtually impossible.
Right.
So the notion that somebody got on there, the movie Hackers from the 80s, Angelina Jolie is typing in some secret code and they're backdooring through the computer. Listen, it's hard enough. Only recently did we get Starlink on ships and we're able to actually get on the internet for an extended period of time. When I first started, it was emails, and it was packets of emails. It would go out every week through a satellite system because it was so expensive, okay? And I'm not that old, guys. I've only been doing this for like 15 years, right? And that's including school. So that was how it first started, and only now, are we getting to the point where we can actually have FaceTime conversations. Yeah. This is the first ship, this last trip I was out, this was the first ship we were actually able to do that.
I remember Amber saying yesterday, it's like prison. It's like I can talk to him, I get an email once a day, and it's going to be at the same exact time.
Yep, and we actually refer to it in the same way, right? How much time do you have left, right? And it's because we're contracted for 120-day hitches or 90-day hitches where we're out at sea for that period of time, and we come into port, but these days, if you're not at sea, you're not making money. So now it's a very quick turnaround. You get in, you get out. So we always say, how much time do you have left? In the same way a prisoner does. How much time do you have left on your bit? How much time do you have left on your hitch, right? So we treat it in a very similar sense. But don't get me wrong, it's a great, great job. And the fact that we're only out there for a maximum of 120 days, that's 4 months, okay? It's a really easy 4 months in the grand scheme of things. It's hard because you're away from home and your environment is always moving. We're sitting in a nice still room right now. But imagine the room moving the whole time. Yeah. It makes everything a lot more complicated.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you're right. That was boring.
I told you.
It's like everybody wants to hear. It's like, oh no, they were hacked. They were hacking through a satellite, and then they were coming down through the comm system, and then they got into the navigation system, and they were able to go from the navigation system and into the power sources and everything. They were able to shut things off, and just so they could hit a bridge and they could shut down commerce and travel around the Baltimore area. It's just like that's just not the case.
I wish it was true. Now, to lend credence to a little bit of their conspiracy theory, you can do something called spoofing a GPS. I'm sure you're familiar with this. So you can do that, and we have had instances of that happening over in the Yellow Sea, Chinese Sea area. read into that what you will. I don't know enough about who's doing it or why because, again, I drive the bus. But we have had instances of spoofing the GPS, and those GPS systems feed right into what we call an ECDIS, which is our electronic chart, and that's how we do a lot of our navigating. So a lot of that, we can have that issue. But again, that's why we hire the local pilot. He's looking out the window, and he knows, okay, there's the bridge, and I need to start turning at this point. He knows. But if he has no way of steering the ship, there's nothing he can do.
How do you learn how to drive that ship? I mean, actually hands-on drive it.
There's a couple of different ways to go about it. The first one is what we call hose piping, where you start as literally the guy that sweeps the floors, takes out the trash, and makes the beds.
Right.
Okay? That one you work your way up, and you don't get a license, you get a credential. And in that credential, it allows you to get higher and higher up. And eventually what you become is what we call an able-bodied seaman for an unlimited capacity. That allows you to steer the ship at any time. You're more of our enlisted guys, for those of the military language.
Right.
That's more the enlisted guys. Hardworking guys, very knowledgeable. They've been on the ships for a long period of time, way more than us officers. Us officers, we have to go to a maritime academy, or we have to hose pipe our way up beyond that stage and spend tens of thousands of dollars to take the classes and the courses and the requirements necessary to then become a licensed officer. So the easiest way most of us do is what I did is to go to a maritime academy.
But the actual driving of the ship, I don't know if it was you or somebody else was telling me that they have a scale model of a ship that sits out there.
Yeah.
It's like got a little tiny rudder that's big.
Yeah. So for that part of it, for being a pilot, for example, right?
Yeah.
In the British system, the British pilots, because again, the British have a long maritime history.
Yeah.
They have this pond, and it's literally what it is. It's a small lake. It's a pond, but it looks like a scale version of going in and out of the United Kingdom in some of their waterways. And what they do is they put you in this 30-foot boat, essentially, that is scaled as a ship. It's the funniest looking thing. It looks like a full-size ship. There's a guy's head sticking out of the top of it.
Yeah.
And they have to steer that ship with everything to scale. So if you run it up on the beach, it's only going 4 or 5 miles an hour because that's all those ships are really doing anyway.
Right.
You can't stop them, right? So, you run it up on the beach, we'll just pull it off the beach and go again.
Right.
It's hilarious. It's a YouTube video. You can look it up. It's hilarious. These little guys steering these ships as though they were large ships. Now, that's an expensive way to do it, but it is the perfect analog way to do it. Some pilots associations throughout the country will send their pilots over there to do that. It's expensive. It's difficult. It takes a long time. The most common way is through countless hours of simulator training as well as hands-on experience. Almost every single pilots association in the country requires an extensive apprentice period where you're following a senior pilot around and they're watching you while you're learning the process. After a couple of years, some paid, some unpaid. After a couple of years of training, you then get to buy into the association as a full-time pilot. You are now responsible for ships, but they don't just throw you into the big stuff. They start.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's like zero margin of error, zero room for mistakes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you end up running into bridges and knocking things down.
Exactly, and they don't want to have that happen now. And like I said, in that guy's case, there's nothing he can do. There's just no power to the ship. You can't do anything. It's a big steel block. So there's nothing much you can do at that stage. But they spend years, and you have to spend years before you can even get to that stage. These guys have been driving ships for decades.
Yeah.
They're very highly trained and very, very well practiced.
So when you're not driving around very expensive ships full of very crucial stuff for American commerce, stuff that's driving GDP and stuff that's creating, economic movement in this country. No pressure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
Then you also go no pressure, and you get on your tiny little parachute and you fly that thing at insane amounts of speed, and you do it professionally and competitively.
Yeah.
This is a sport that I have no desire to do, even though I do the sport, but I don't do it anymore, which is called swooping. And it's a form of skydiving. It's flying small parachutes, but it has everything to do with the setup and the landing, how you control all the different aspects of that flight so that you land safely. But you're not always just landing. Sometimes you have to land on a certain spot. Sometimes you want to go as fast as you possibly can to try to get your time, or you're trying to go as far as you can. The three main parts of swooping. So break down for us, first of all, what swooping is, And then let's dive into what how it is that you got there. So just talk to me about your skydiving journey, but let's start with just first explain swooping so they can see where we're going to end up.
All right, so swooping is a little silly. When you think about an airplane landing, most of us have ridden in an airplane, and it comes on a straight final approach, and then it sets itself down nice and easy, and everything's all good, right? Swooping is going the exact opposite direction. That's too slow and too boring. And that's, by the way, how parachutes land, of course.
Right.
So swooping takes exact opposite approach. We actually spin the canopy around in a circle, essentially, to build speed diving at the ground. The idea being that we want to go as far, as fast, or as accurate.
Can you grab an example of what swooping looks like so they can kind of see what we're talking about? When you say going in circles, they're not going to really. This is set up right here.
So this is the going through the process right here. So I'm starting to dive the canopy here, and what I'm doing is I'm encouraging it to sort of continue to dive at the ground. It's losing lift. Every time I turn it, it's diving. So I'm just keeping it turning. And I'm finishing that off is what we call the snap. And I'm approaching the course here this is a practice run prior to nationals. And this was meant to be a distance run, but it's really windy that day. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through the training process of where I need to position that parachute, where I need to be overall, how fast I need to turn it, how slow I need to turn it, the precision of 1 second here, half a second here, things like that. So swooping is just diving a parachute at the ground because straight-in landing is really boring.
And then let's make sure we fly it out of that dive. Because if you don't, they bad stuff happens.
Right.
And we've all known somebody in the sport of swooping who has been at least injured significantly, but it has a mortality rate. This is a sport that can kill you.
This is the most dangerous aspect of skydiving, and it takes many, many, many years to get to the point. I've been doing this since 2014, and very early on, I knew that so we're at a decade now, and very early on, I knew that I wanted to swoop. It just appealed to who I was with my history of other things that kind of brought in that competition aspect. It appealed to me greatly. So I knew this is what I wanted to do, and very early, I started dedicating time to this. It's a slow process. Everybody sees the end result. The end result is awesome. It's the only discipline in skydiving you can watch from the ground. You can come sit out here in bleachers and watch it. And people do. Not very many, but people do. Yeah. But everything that it takes to get there takes years and hours and training, downsizing, sometimes upsizing your parachute. Sometimes the small one's too small. You got to go back up a little bit. You got to kind of start all over. Every time I get off a ship, I have to start all over. Now, that process is quicker now because I've been doing it for 10 years. But prior to that, it was start all over for safety because it is dangerous.
I remember in the late 90s, that's when I first got prorated, was in 99. And it wasn't called swooping at the time. It was called Pro Blade Tour. Yeah. And it was like Luigi Conti, Clint Clausen, J.C. Kochlischer, Tigger. There was a few other guys, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was on the Navy parachute team, we went to one of their clinics so they could show us how to do it. And I remember the first time I ever did a 270 swoop, I was on a Stiletto 135. And it was, I was set up on the wrong side because of winds, and where we got out, I wanted to do a right hand turn. I was on the other side, so I came in, so I had to do a left hand, and it was just like, let's go. And so I just went for it, and it worked out.
Yeah.
And I remember that feeling when you're in that dive and you're coming out, you're like, this is gonna work out. And you plan. I think I probably at the time I was probably at maybe 180 pounds or something like that. Flying a 135, high, super quickly recovering canopy. And when I first came out, I probably had by less than 1,000 skydives. And when it came out, I was on the ground, just the juice, yes, that was so awesome. I'm like, I want to do this forever. So I started training, started doing it all the time, and started getting coaching from our coach on the Navy parachute team who had been doing it for a while. And I remember he told me once, he said, there are two types of people that swoop. There are the ones who have crashed, and there are the ones who will crash.
Yeah.
And that has always stuck with me. And I remember Sam, before because both boys got to skydive a little early. They started when they were 16.
Yeah.
Sam started, and the first thing he said to me was, "Hey, Dad, can I jump your 90?" I was like, "How about we do the first jump course first?"
Right.
And he was like, "Okay. I mean, if you want, just let me try it. I mean, I'll do it." and now Micah is, and I think both boys are now your students.
Yeah.
Both of my kids are your students, and we always joke about that, because we always talk about, when you're a dad and you're doing dad stuff. As a dad, one of our jobs is to be extremely secure with allowing other men to have input into our boys' lives.
100%.
If you don't have that kind of security, and you're going to try to hoard all of the teaching that's going to go into your boys' lives, you're going to inhibit your boys from learning everything that they need to know as a man, because there are certain things that there are guys in my life, you being one of them, that can teach my boys certain things better than I could. I didn't teach them how to drive a stick shift. Johnny Hoffman did that.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I didn't teach them how to skydive. Jay taught Micah. Amber had Sam. Amber, right? Dalton. Oh, you had Dalton. So Dalton had Sam. Now they're starting to get to that point to where they want to fly fast, and they want to do the high performance landings like what you do. And they're coming into that as I'm coming out, which is perfect, because now I don't have any gear, because I had a whole room full of gear. Now my boys have a whole room full of gear, and I have to ask them to borrow my own gear to go and do jumps. Yeah, right. Yeah. Sam's were like, I asked Micah the other day. We had this crazy conversation over text message. Micah, what is in this container? He's like, the 90. What is in? Okay, cool. But what's in this container? The 90. Which one are you jump? Because I never gave him permission to jump that other container, right? And then he's so it was this, like, you are. Which one are you jumping?
Well, I'm jumping first.
I'm jumping the one that's oh, I get it. I was just like, So we had this whole long conversation drawn out over where the gear is, what the gear is. So bottom line is I don't have any gear. I have to ask them what gear is up, which one has a repack ready to go, which the reserve repack, which one can I go and jump if I want to jump. But my thing now is no longer what you're doing. I'm coming out of that, and so I'm going to be moving from jumping the little 90s, and I'm going to be moving, because we're probably maybe a little heavier than I am, but that wing loading, as soon as you get down to 90, you're jumping stuff that's down in the 70s and lower.
Oh yeah. The smallest I'll have is probably a 71, and that's because the designs of parachutes are now becoming so efficient that we can actually effectively upsize. The smallest one that I jumped at Nationals was a 69 square foot, and the smallest one I have in my bag is a 68 square foot. But those are on the extreme small end.
Yeah.
I only use those for very rare specialized.
So what are you wing loading at then at say 70, 71?
71 currently is about a 3.6 to 1 wing loading.
Good night.
Yeah.
Explain wing loading so they can understand how that works.
Wing loading is basically just a measurement of pounds per square foot. So for every square foot of fabric, there's that many pounds pulling on that piece of fabric. And essentially what it does is it lets you know the sensitivity nature of that particular parachute as you're flying it. So if I'm flying on a 1 pound per square foot, so a 1-to-1, it's not that much, right? It's kind of a beginner level, or as a student, 0.8 or 0.9 to 1 type level.
Right.
What we're looking at is extremely high wing loading numbers as a performance envelope. Right. So the higher we go to an extent, there is a diminishing point of return here. Right. The higher we go to extent, the faster I can make that thing go.
Right.
So typically the highest we're seeing now with the advent of the Mutant and the hip harnesses in skydiving, we're seeing over 4s now. We're seeing 4.1, 4.2 to 1. That can be done. I'm not a big advocate of that personally. I think that's a little bit too high on the envelope.
Right.
But it can be done. So we're seeing really high wing loads. That's starting to come down with the development of parachute technology.
Yeah, at 90, I'm about 2.5, and that was well enough for me.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to go up to, I think I'm going to start jumping the Fluid Wings Gangster 135.
Yeah.
And go up to that and be good with it.
There is nothing wrong in this world with upsize. The first question I ask everybody when they tell me they want to downsize is why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are you trying to do? The reason I was doing it was competition. So I needed a very specific wing loading number to be able to compete at the same level that everybody else is, or a similar level. But when everybody comes up to me, especially new guys, because they see it on TV or on YouTube or whatever, and they want, I want to downsize and swoop. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Do you realize the risk to reward ratio that you're getting in here? And quite frankly, most of them don't. The vast majority of people just don't have the information.
Yeah.
Right. And they make what they think is an educated decision, but it's only, they saw it on TV or YouTube or whatever. And they go, oh, now I know.
So when people are talking about skydiving, when you talk to people out on the street, friends of yours or whatever, you're playing pool with your buddies at someone's house and they say, oh man, you skydive, man, I've always thought about that. I always want to do it, but man, I'm too scared to do it. My response to that is you have a higher chance of getting killed driving the drop zone than you do getting hurt while you're there.
Yeah.
Unless you're flying small canopies without the experience to do it, because the majority of incidents and accidents that happen in skydiving happen under fully functioning parachutes, but it's somebody that's in a little bit too deep of water with the parachute that they have, or if they're flying their parachute and there's those kind of strange things that can happen because you didn't maintain your gear.
Right.
You didn't change your line sets.
Right.
You know, so those are certain things. So we'll get into that here in a second. But, because gear maintenance is key. I happen to have a very fondness for the guy that maintains all of our parachute systems because he's my firstborn.
I was going to say, there might be a relation there.
And he's been packing parachutes for 10 years. He's 22 years old. He's been packing parachutes since he was 12. I have pictures of him as a toddler, below toddler, climbing around on my Navy parachute team parachute systems, and I showed that to him the other day, and he was like, makes sense, checks out,
He's my student, but actually I'm now his student in a capacity, so I'm teaching him to swoop, and he's teaching me to be a rigger. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, so parachute rigging is a very specific sort of discipline. I was a rigger in a different discipline prior to this, but parachute rigging is a very sort of specific thing, and you have to go through a training process. Micah is an experienced rigger, so I'm training him to swoop. He's training me to be a rigger.
Yeah, that's a good thing about this sport is it's just so family. It's like it's like everybody comes out here with their junk. Everybody's got their stuff. They got the things that have happened to them in their history. They have their abuses. They have their craziness that happened growing up. Guys coming out there bringing their combat traumas, the stuff that happened to some of the people they didn't have great upbringings. They didn't have great dads. They've been through divorces and had kids break bad and everything else. You come out here. The thing about skydiving is you get in that airplane, as soon as that door opens, all that's gone.
Yep.
It's all gone, and then you get that adrenaline dump, and then you get out the door and you're flying with your buddies. Everything else, parachute opens. Now I got part 2. Now I get to fly this fast parachute, and then you get on the ground and you're just like, yes, that's awesome. And then 2-3 minutes later, you're just like, life.
Do it again.
Life.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go up again, jump again. Yeah. So I explain this to people that when you're going to go and do a tandem, you are attaching yourself to a guy that is a professional skydiver. This is what he does for a living. You are going to be fine. They are not going to let anything happen to you because they're not going to let anything happen to themselves.
That's
Ergo,
right.
By proximity, you are going to be safe.
Right.
And whenever anybody comes out here, they are always just like, I cannot believe I waited this long to do that.
Yeah.
It's so awesome. And to that point, we have a customer out here. Her name is Wendy. And have you met Wendy?
I've met Wendy. Yeah.
She's amazing. She comes down from like Newport or Huntington Beach or something like that, and she's a mental health care provider up there. She comes down and she told me her first day here. She said, "I have not flown in an airplane since the year 2000, and I have an extreme fear of heights and of aircraft.
Right.
And I couldn't let that be an example to my kids.
Yeah.
And so what I want to do is I want to skydive. And so I want to have the amount of airplane takeoffs that I have far exceed the amount of airplane landings that I have."
Nice.
So she comes down here about every weekend, and every time she comes down, she brings 2 or 3 people to share this experience with, because it has literally revolutionized the way that she does business in her head and her heart, and that smile that's on her face. She'll show up even if we have crap weather outside. Yep. She's still staying there. She's just staring at the sky going, "I think it's going to break. You think it's going to break?" I'm like, "I don't know, honey. I don't think it's going to break. I don't think it's going to break." I was like, that's what I told her. I'm like, you have just become the fun jumper that just does tandems.
Yep.
So, I mean, she's coming up on like 20 tandems now. and just absolutely has fallen in love with this sport. And that is one of the most interesting things about this sport, is because once you do it, you are either going to love it or you're going to be like, box checked, moving on.
And I've encountered that, right? As a tandem instructor here, I've encountered people that will land with them and I'll go, all right, how was it? Best experience ever. Like, all right, I hope to see you again at Skydive San Diego and jump with us again. You going to do it again? No. Yeah. Like, all right. You check that box. You got it done. You accomplished that goal. You faced that fear. Nice job. Excellent. Excellent. Now you get to go home and say that you did that thing.
Right.
And then there are those who do the exact opposite. You going to do it with us again? Yeah. How do I learn?
Yeah. You're like, well,
that's where you're going to.
That's where you get to meet Amber.
Yeah. Let me introduce you to Amber. She'll tell you all.
Who is your girlfriend?
Yeah, she's my girlfriend.
Yeah. And she's amazing. She runs the school out here, and she has wormed her way into my dark, cold heart somehow. Yeah. And I view her as literally as a family member. Both of you guys, everybody out here. This is like, I love. It doesn't matter how stressful things are, or how tough things are for whatever, or how good things are. I just love coming to work because I love seeing the look on people's faces when they come here, and there is something about a drop zone, a healthy drop zone with a healthy culture, that even when the customers show up, they're like, I can see how that's different, you know. But then also on top of it, like we were talking about earlier, just having my kids around just healthy adult males, you know, like even Zach and Sam, like watching those guys work. Zach mentors Sam, right? Yeah. You mentor both the boys. Amber mentors both the boys. Right. You know, the boys call you, and Amber, or their drop zone mom, drop zone dad. Yeah. You know.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I love that as a dad. I love that because I know that there is amazing, healthy people out there that are inputting into my boys, that are driving them. But as long as they're listening to that authority, they're going to be way safer in an inherently dangerous sport than the guy who's out there going, oh yeah, whatever, Bryan. Yeah, cool, Buffalo, whatever, dude. Yeah. And then they go out and they go and they send something that they probably shouldn't, and they end up stabbing out of a corner, which I guess I should qualify that means that they're a little too close to the ground, a little too low, and they're trying to stab with using their brake, trying to stab out and try to get out of that thing, which is now they're not going to get any speed, they're not going to get any distance, they might live through it. And when I see that, sometimes I'm like, oh gosh. So every time they're doing their turn and they come out high, I'm like, Mike is flying. He's like 10 feet up. He's flying by me. I'm like, that was awesome, dude. Yeah, like, I hate my life. You know?
But it is really the problem, right? It's the lack of understanding. Okay, so if we come into the sport of anything, I don't care what the sport is or what the thing is that you're doing, what discipline it is that you're doing, whether it's your job, your sport, your hobby, whatever it is, right? Pottery, I don't care. When you come into that, you start on a scale of 1 to 10. You start with a knowledge of 0.
Yes. Yep.
The next person up might be the most authoritative person you've ever met. They might be the most knowledgeable person you've ever met with a knowledge of 1 out of 10. That's a 100% increase in that knowledge. Yes. The danger comes, and it's really hard when you encounter a lot of 1s. What we need is a lot of 8s, 9s, and 10s.
Yes.
And there is so much information in our sport that people just don't know. They think they do. They're so adamant that I have the answer because I did this thing that makes me capable of having a 1 of information. And now that I have that 1, I'm going to stop because I already know all the things, or so I think.
Yeah.
And they unfortunately pass that information along as though they are experts.
Yes.
When in actuality, this, like any other thing, needs constant attention. You need to constantly spend time studying, researching. There's new technology. There's new ideologies that are out there. And you have to follow up on those. And inside the sport of skydiving, we're just kind of talking broad brush right now. Oh, yeah.
But then you break it down. Now you have swooping,
right?
And you have 4-way, and you have free flying, and you have wingsuiting, and then you have the new stuff where they're starting to mix up belly and free flying, and then you have the one where they're starting to mix swooping and high performance canopy piloting and wingsuiting.
Yeah.
And so to put it in perspective, people don't. Do you have the XRW you can find? When people don't understand how fast the parachute is that you fly,
right?
But they have an idea because they've all seen somebody doing close proximity wingsuit flying next to some cliff or going through some hole in a rock.
Yeah.
or seeing them flying down in valleys and stuff, and they see these guys are going literally 100 something miles an hour.
Yeah.
And then you have canopies and you have wingsuiters flying relative to each other.
Yeah.
Is this it right here?
So this is Brad and Luca, and I used to do a lot of jumping with these guys. These guys are absolute experts when it comes to this stuff. You can see they're doing something here a little advanced. It's called crew, canopy relative work. I know you know that from the frogs. This is doing it on high-performance parachutes, and you can see these wingsuiters are flying right along with them. Now, the wingsuiters are flying at the lower end of their speed capability. They're capable of going quite a bit faster than this. But these parachutes, they're not putting an input in this. This is them at just regular flight. They haven't slowed it down. They haven't sped it up. This is just them flying along with these wingsuiters. What they're doing here this is called a crucifix. What they're doing here is because of bottom, sides, and all that stuff. This is an incredibly difficult maneuver for them to achieve. This takes them years and years and years of practice, discipline, training, and focus. Brad, in that video, is one of the best paraglider pilots on the planet. I mean, by far. Okay. Yep. And
you don't hear about him though.
You don't. And
he's not that way. Yeah, he's a sleeper. That dude.
I managed to convince Brad and Luca to come with me to nationals a couple of years ago in Arizona. Brad, without really even trying, was able to beat so many world-class pilots who have dedicated their lives to this, to the point where he got caught in a thermal on his last run and got bumped up about 60 or 80 feet before he even started the turn, which for us as canopy pilots would ruin the whole thing. I went up 5 feet, that's it, it's ruined. Brad went up 60 or 80 feet and was able to compensate. And not only compensate, but I think he got third overall in the distance discipline.
Wow.
Which is mind-blowing. With almost no effort at all.
And not even training.
He just went.
Yeah. Was that for one of his times where he I'm not going to jump for 6 weeks and just...
Yeah. Most of us have 4 or 5 parachutes in some cases. You know, the top guy, Kurt Bartholomew, now has 15 parachutes, and it's because he does testing and stuff. But he's got all these parachutes we're going through all the time. Oh, the wind is this, and we're doing this discipline. I need this exact parachute. Okay. Brad showed up with 1, and he was able to do it all with 1. And it just goes to show you, when we talked about that knowledge base, Brad's knowledge base is so much larger than your average skydiver. Mm-hmm. He is a really experienced and highly knowledgeable individual when it comes to winged flight. And so you put him in that environment, and all these guys, I've got the answer. No, you don't. And here's this guy who can show you don't.
Right.
And it's a lot of fun to see because it shakes them all up and it gets them riled up.
Here's the guy who's going to show you, and be advised, he's going to use 3 words to do it. You're going to have to try to get as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. He's not going to tell you much. He's not going to brag much. At the end of the day, he's going to put on his T-shirt, go to the bar, and have a drink and play pool. Right. And tomorrow he'll wake up and he'll beat you again.
Right. Yeah. So good. Yeah. And so for what you do with canopy piloting, XRW, the swooping, you've recently stepped into competing at the highest level.
Yeah.
Right. So explain to us what that looks like, because people and where people can go and see it, and where, because of course there's YouTube, and you just enter swooping, and then you can watch hours and hours of guys swooping a pond and seeing how close to death they actually are when they're doing that. Yeah. But walk us through what you got going on competition-wise and what you've done so far.
In 2019, I'd been competing since 2017. In 2019, I managed to win the nationals in the lower category, in the advanced category. That allowed me to go what they called pro or open. In that capacity, it means I can fly any parachute I want, any size, any wing loading.
Because you're limited in novice or beginner and advanced. There's only certain. You're not limited in really wing size, probably, right? You're limited on your wing loading.
Wing loading is really the more critical aspect of that. You can fly a really small wing to a certain extent, but the wing loading kind of limits you. If you're over a certain wing loading, then you're kind of limited on what you can do. The rules get a little kind of strange, but basically, once you finally go pro or open, you're free to do whatever you'd like, which has allowed us to get into hip harnesses, which I'll get to in a second. In 2019, after I won, it means now I go pro, which means I fly the most extreme parachutes available on the market. The HK2s, the HK3s, which are the latest and greatest that are coming out. Petras,
from
Fluid Wings, right? Yeah. They're building they are still currently designing, building, and innovating new designs as we speak currently. There are things they have in that shop, all parachute manufacturers, but Fluid has things in the shop that they designed last week. And they're kind of getting ready to fine-tune them and present them to the public. It takes time. It's a long process. but they're still doing it. So all these really high-performance parachutes are available, all these really high-end techniques. Now I have to compete against guys on the world level, guys that are the best in the world at this sport. Fortunately, one of them is an American. He lives right here, so I get to compete against him all the time. But now I have to do this at an unforgiving level. So as I go through that process, it's just go to competitions, regional events, national events, and if you can get to them, world events. And you got to compete against the best. And you'll know really quick where you stand.
Right.
Really quick.
Yeah. And when do we have because this is you right here. You're about
this is a national championship run. This is one of the speed runs at nationals. I think this might have been the last one of the event. I had the pleasure of jumping out right before Al Burstall was a president of the USPA at the time, and he got to follow me down, which was a lot of fun.
Break it down what your RDS and stuff like that.
So what just came off there is a slider, just assists an opening, and then the RDS attaches the D-bag and pilot chute, the deployment bag and the pilot chute.
Yeah, our RDS is removable deployment system.
Exactly.
That's basically the bag that the parachute was in when it was in your container. So you just wound that all up and you just put it in your pocket.
Because you don't need it anymore. You only need it for the opening.
Because it's just parasitic drag at that point.
Exactly. Removable deployment system. Now I'm deployed. I don't need it. Now what I'm doing here is I'm cleaning up the rings that hold the slider on. It's just getting this more into a race car mode, right? We're just going fast here. I'm getting rid of the drag. I'm getting rid of the unnecessary things. This is just the cleanup process. As I'm doing this, I'm also staying in an area close to the course. I'm keeping myself nearby, knowing that in a minute here, I'm going to have to start moving this thing really quick.
Yep. So pause that real quick. So on a new skydiver, they have two things that are going to control that parachute that they're going to focus on, right?
Yeah.
Our slang is we call them stopping ropes, but it's the toggles.
Yeah.
You put your fingers in the toggles and you see them there as like the two yellow things out of the back. And if you have them in just regular flight, hands up. If you have left arm up, right arm down, you're going to go right. It is not rocket science.
Right.
Where it becomes tricky is where you start to get down into, say, the 150, maybe 130, 120 range, right? Now you're starting to use, and even before that, 190s, 170s, you're starting to use front risers, rear risers, right? Yeah. Break that down for us.
This is all part of the canopy control technique. We call it canopy piloting because every student parachute has the same stuff that my parachute has. I'm removing some of it after the deployment system, but a student has the exact same stuff on it. The only difference now is hip harnesses. Again, we'll get to that. But the student has the exact same stuff. So what I'm doing essentially at this point is just removing all that stuff to give myself the ability to maneuver around using front risers, rear risers. It's all the manipulation of the parachute and the geometry in which that flies.
Yep. You pull on your front risers, like stepping on a gas pedal, because you take the pitch of the parachute, it might be angled like this. You just kind of make it like that.
You're encouraging it.
It's going to be sliding down a hill faster.
Right.
Right? Rear risers, you're just kind of like leveling it out a little bit. You're going to slow it down a little bit.
Right.
And then, of course, you have your toggles. But when you get to that level where you're at, right, as soon as you get down, well, I mean, it's like you can do hip harness turns at any level, but it becomes an integral part of the turn, everything else. And so while you're doing that, while you're removing all the stuff and you're putting it in speed mode, so to speak, right? Now, to be able to keep that thing where you have to go, you're basically just controlling it with the harness.
Essentially, yeah. The United States Parachute Association defines a high-performance parachute as anything 150 square feet and smaller. The one we're looking at here is 69 square feet, okay? And I'm loading it at about 3.6 to 1.
Yeah.
So very high performance.
So it's like a student parachute to your parachute. A student parachute's like driving a bus.
Yes.
Yours is like driving a F1 car.
That's a fantastic analogy because when you drive a bus, you change the oil, you check the tires. When you drive an F1 car, you pull it into the shop at the end of the day and you take a very careful look at it. So again, like we talked about with maintenance, you got to know what you're looking at. You got to understand the equipment.
Yeah. Okay?
And it's the same thing. I have to treat it like a race car. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Right? You have to treat it like a race car.
You have to
treat it like a high-end piece of equipment because it is.
Yeah. That's why I always watch Micah, because he's always in there wrenching on our parachute systems, always looking at the connection points, always looking at the line conditions.
The line conditions are important. Remember, you're hanging your body.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that again here in a little bit.
Yeah.
But but check this out. So now you're in the toggles. You're just basically just keeping it in the area, but you don't fly a lot with your toggles, right?
No, at this stage, all I'm doing in the toggles is I'm giving myself a chance to take a breath. So now you can see I let them up, and I'm going to fly around a little bit more on the rear risers. risers.
But you're keeping your hands in the toggles.
My hands almost never leave my toggles. And as a student, we teach you never to do that. There are exceptions to it, but not as a student. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm flying myself into the position that I know I need to be in to start my turn, to give myself the right spot geographically over the ground, as well as the right altitude. Those have to line up almost perfectly for this. The more perfect I can make the turn, the more perfect the run is going to be. So in this case, you can see me manipulating the parachute here a little bit to get it to where I need to go. Now I know where I'm going to be. I don't want to put any more input on that wing, so I'm going to put my hands on my front risers and start to turn. Remember, as you turn, the canopy loses lift and starts to dive. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now I'm just building up a lot of speed. I'm making my way towards that course. This is a speed run, so I'm outside, and I'll make a little turn here. And then what they do is they measure the amount of time it took you to go through that course, and that's your speed run. I think that was relatively slow in the grand scheme. I think that was about a 2.4 second run. You'll see guys that I think the current world record is 1.8 seconds. So, yeah, it's insanely fast.
And so how fast were you going right there?
As I entered that course, I was probably doing about 85 miles an hour.
Okay.
Something like that.
So if someone's doing 1.8, what are they doing?
1.8, they're entering the course closer to 100 miles an hour, and they're carrying that speed. They're probably exiting the course closer to the high 60s, low 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, just incredible amounts of speed on a very sensitive parachute. Hip attachments, harness inputs, they're very sensitive, and you've got to get that thing through the course. You can't go higher than those buoys that we saw. If you go higher than those buoys, it's a zero. So you have to stay within that course.
So when people are wondering how it is that somebody can get hurt so badly or get killed doing that, it is the equivalent of being on a motorcycle without a motorcycle. You're winging down a road just by yourself at 80 miles an hour, and then you hit something.
Yeah.
Something that won't move.
Yeah.
And which would be the earth. Right? Yeah. And you stop instantly.
Yeah.
That is going to cause death.
Yeah.
Right?
It usually does if you do it like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So fortunately, most of the time it's just an injury, right? You skip off the ground. That's why we're over water. The water provides a little bit of safety, but the water can still get you too. So it provides a little extra safety, but it allows us to go through that process with a little margin of safety, but it is still exceptionally dangerous across the board. It's something, again, it takes years to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's when you're doing that type of stuff, like you have to be a gear nerd. You have to be a gear nerd.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you have to be really close. You have to know a gear nerd.
Yeah.
You're going to, I remember when I first started in this sport, and probably, my first jump was in 92 without static moving. And then I think it was 96 or something like that. I think I went through military free fall, got bit by the bug, right? And I was like, I am going to do this as long as I possibly can. Still doing it. And it's a lot of guys who've been doing it this long have, like, I got buddies of mine that are over 20,000 skydives, somewhere around 6, and it's because the last 8 years of being a drop zone owner, I haven't had time to, I was like, I get a drop zone, I jump all the time.
Yeah, right. Sure.
No, didn't happen. No. And I don't really do tandems anymore. I think my last tandem was with Danielle in the morning, a 91X.
Yeah.
And I landed. I just kind of felt something in my knee. And I was just like, I guess that was my last tandem, because you have to have good landing gear.
Yeah.
You have to be strong. You have to be fit.
Yeah.
It's if you're going to do this, you have to have some semblance of a fitness level.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are not prehabbed for what is coming, because there is going to be the time where you eat. Doesn't matter how fit you are. Amber, very fit. Right? Comes in and lands, and just a little something happens, and now she has an ankle injury. Now she's got to go ahead and deal with that, so, which breaks my heart, because I know that there's nowhere she'd rather be than in the air with her students, because she is a phenomenal AFF instructor.
Yeah,
like in my opinion, knowing a lot of them, but not having an AFF rating is not my jam. I never wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But in my biased opinion, she's one of the best in the world at what she does.
I would agree completely.
But she knows gear so well.
Yeah.
You know gear so well.
Right. Micah
knows gear so well.
Right.
I was a parachute rigger in the Navy when I was on the Navy parachute team, and I had 45 parachutes that I had to deal with myself. Tim IG, Mike Ford. We were always back there in that loft, always wrenching on gear. And I remember one time, I remember who came through. I think it was Freddie Williams from CPS. It was at CPS at the time. I think he was still maybe active duty at the time. He was he was a team guy, rigger at Dev Group, an amazing guy and very knowledgeable. And I was doing reserve on the ground, and he was like, hey, man, let me show you a better technique to do that, because he saw me fighting this reserve. And he got down there and finished that reserve up, and I was like, gosh, you just made that thing your bitch, dude. It's like you just owned it.
Oh, yeah.
And then he got he goes, you want to see me do it all the way through? Well, at the time, it took me probably a good maybe hour, maybe longer to do a full reserve, at least to get to where I'm closing it. It took him maybe 20 minutes, and he was just flowing and talking the entire time. And I got a lot of my techniques down watching him. That's where I said, there are levels to this game.
Oh, yeah.
Even packing and rigging, there are levels to this.
Yeah.
And watching him do that. So I took a lot of what he did, and I put it on board, and on board my knowledge base. While he was out there, we were having to do we were starting to do some relines. We had probably 13 shows that year that were on beaches.
Ooh.
And we did a lot of training out in Yuma that year. We did a lot of stuff out in the desert, and we started getting a lot of line breaks.
Yeah.
And he saw, I think Tim was over there replacing a line set on one of the Lightnings. And and Freddie went over and looked at it, and he goes, are you guys jumping on sand a lot? Are you near sand? He goes, all you have to do is be near sand. And you're going to get some in here. And he started explaining how 1 grain of sand gets inside the lines, and you start putting pressure, opening shock, turning always is always going to, that centrifugal force when you're doing a turn is going to create tension on those lines. Every time you do that little grain of sand is in there. It's like a little tiny baby samurai warrior, and he's in there just slinging that thing around, and and just breaking these lines apart. And then, and so we started going through our lines. We had to change out all the lines on everything. And this is after 3 or 4 guys broke their A lines. I was one of them. I had an A line break, and it's such a big, huge, forgiving parachute. You chopping it on a parachute like that, you're gonna have to chop it most likely, right?
Yeah.
On a Lightning, you're good. You can fly it in, you can land it. It's not gonna change your descent rate. So recently I was watching just some of the things that are happening in our sport, and I saw that recently there was a fatality. I think it was out in Dubai with a fluid wings canopy, and I was reading that, and as soon as I was reading that, I remember thinking in my mind, I'm like, I think I know what was going on here, especially when I started seeing kind of what the lines look like. Right. Whoever had that, they for whatever reason, and I'm not like throwing blame. I'm just saying is that those lines should have been changed long before this happened, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's my background is in sailboat racing, Olympic level sailboat racing. And one of the things that we learned very quickly was lines do specific things. Specific types of lines do specific things.
Right.
Skydiving, we're a microcosm of that. For your Lightning, you have Dacron lines. That's so that you guys can do crew. You don't need high performance lines. You actually kind of want them bigger.
They're huge.
Yeah, they're gigantic, right? And that's by design. There's an intention behind that. You don't need the type of lines that we're jumping on my high-performance parachute.
Yeah, which is what do you guys have?
The industry standard now for those is Vectran.
Vectrans, okay.
And there's all these fancy names for them. Vectran, Technora, Dyneema. There's all these fancy names out there, and almost all of them are created by DuPont, right? Kevlar, that's a name that DuPont gave to that product, okay? So what ends up happening here is we have a very specific piece of equipment, and again, we've got an F1 car, we've got a race car here, and we have to know what that piece of equipment does. With my sailing background, I'm very familiar with that. I'm learning the skydiving reserve packing process, but it doesn't change the material science behind it. So a lot of what ends up happening is, again, we have that zero information group, that people they're skydivers. We know maybe one, okay? And again, there's somebody who becomes a rigger or becomes that local person who got that. They went from a 1 to a 2, a 100% increase from what they knew before. And now they're the expert, right?
Yep.
What do we always say? Go ask your rigger. Not all riggers are created equal, all right?
Right.
So some riggers think they have
this
the
one's
answer.
not. This one's not. I barely know how to pack my main anymore. The beautiful thing about going and jumping for me now is I come back and I have the 2 reasons you have kids. Well, 3. One is to clean your guns.
Yep.
Another one is to pack your parachutes.
Yep.
And the other one is to carry stuff when you start getting old.
Yeah, right.
And so I got 2 really super able-bodied. My babies over here aren't exactly babies. 20, 22 years old. And Mike is always so good. Sam, too. It's just like, want me to pack that for you? But when they first started, it was really funny because we were on the airplane. It was me and both boys. We were going to go and jump together. And I looked at them, and they kind of had that 5-year-old mischievous grin. And Micah goes, "Hey, I just thought of something." I was like, "What?" Like, it's never whatever comes out of his mouth next is going to be funny for him. It's going to make me uncomfortable.
Of course.
He was like, "I packed your reserve. Sam packed your main." Remember that? I was like, I'll be pulling high.
Yeah, right. I'll add some altitude here. Yeah.
And they just burst out laughing. Everyone plays like, what are they laughing at? I was like, nothing to see here.
Don't worry about it. Yeah, it's important. And these two guys, I mean, Micah's a fantastic rigger. Sammy's learning his way through it, and but it is a process, right? It's information that we all have to learn. If you are not a student of whatever it is you're doing it wrong. If you think you have the answers for whatever it is, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
And so it's great to have...
Get another opinion. I look at my parachute system every once in a while, or there has been things that have happened out here where gear was just put together wrong.
Right.
I remember Amber came and got me. We had one of those. I'm looking at it, and I was looking at the soft links.
Yeah.
I was looking at it, and I was just like, I went and looked at the other one. It was held together by tension.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that was holding it together. And I was like, "Whew, okay." So it's parachute riggers can make a mistake. When I was rigging a lot, I never, everything I did, I would get another set of eyes to look at it because I don't trust myself. And it's not that I don't have confidence. It's just that I know that my friends are going to be hanging underneath this thing.
Right. And
there were times where I would just have put a parachute in service. And we're up there doing something gnarly. We had some wild hair up our ass to go do something like a 5x-side.
Yeah.
We got pro between every guy. When that thing was a 5-stack, and then it was supposed to be a big, huge wagon wheel. And that thing tied an overhand knot, massive malfunction, guys, pros breaking down. There's mains, deep free bags all over the sky, and I'm the only guy under my main, and all I see is I look around, I just see a bunch of canopies just falling out of the sky.
Yep.
Free bags everywhere, and the guys are all down there. They're all flying together because they're talking under canopy under their reserves.
Yep.
They're like, "That was awesome," and there's me by myself going, "Oh, thank you, Lord, for letting those all open," because it was high pressure for me, and it freaked me out. But I always had somebody checking that gear. And even going out, I'm really big. Every time these guys are going out to jump, I'm like, "Hey, make sure you give each other gear checks." When it comes down to your main canopy, the riggers are going to be taking care of the reserve repack, making sure everything's good on it, even the main. But it's the responsibility of the jumper to make sure that his gear is in proper order, right? I even know local riggers around here that were talking about that incident and saying, "Well, I will never jump fluid wings again," or I think that's an absolute. Well, it wasn't the wing,
right?
It was poor maintenance of the lines, right. And those lines were being jumped in an austere environment where they're exposed to sand,
right.
Multiple jumps without being changed. There's a lot of factors that went into it, and lines, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're made, like, there's 2, maybe 3 companies, and they're not canopy manufacturers that make the lines. Everybody gets their lines from somewhere else. Well, of course, the lines have to be cut a certain way and attached a certain way, all that kind of stuff, but none of that was the factor.
No, none of that was the factor. And you're right. There's only a handful of people that actually make this stuff. What we're talking about here, most common now on higher performance parachutes, are what we call Vectran, again, a name coined by DuPont. Vectran is what they call a liquid crystal polymer. Really fancy name. What it is, though, is it's a literal molecular polymer chain that they have to heat up, they have to form it and turn it into a fiber. The way these lines work, and they work on various sizes. We use similar line types on ships as well. The way these work is that the fibers, the little fibers that make up the strand, that make up the line, are all very critical to the way that line functions. And so it doesn't matter who the manufacturer is of that particular parachute or of that particular line. They're all getting them from the same place because it takes a lot of machinery and a lot of technology to make these things. So you're not just in your garage heating up your oven and making this line. You have to create this on a very molecular level, okay? So it all goes from these manufacturers. The one manufacturer that is the most common as a manufacturing plant in, I believe, South Carolina and Japan. That's it. So from there, all that stuff gets distributed out to the exact same distributors. Then it doesn't matter who you are. You buy that material from those distributors, and then you put it on your piece of equipment. It has nothing to do with who sewed that piece together. It has to do with the maintenance.
Because this became a big deal.
This became a huge deal. And it was just, again, it was somebody that had a one level of knowledge, right? They went from 0 to 1, and now they know everything because they had 100% gain in knowledge. But they still don't know what they don't know. And it's unfortunately very pervasive in a lot of people. And they spread bad information. Again, you got local riggers around here, people who they might have some knowledge. They might be very, very good at what they do, but they don't know what they don't know. Okay? There are great riggers out there that have this understanding, that have done the deep dives on this. And then there are those who just got their rigger's ticket and said, okay, I'm good. I can pack reserves. I know everything.
So everybody knows what we're talking about because we seem to be kind of diving into this a little bit. Yeah. Is there was a fatality. Yeah. In Dubai. Yeah. So you were just out in Fluid Wings, and you were out with Scott and Cola Roberts, the owners, who have insane amounts of canopy experience, from paragliders and speed wings, and you were flying some of their new stuff that's out, some of their old stuff that they have for a while, and you were just having a blast out there and doing a bunch of photo shoots because you're sponsored by Fluid Wings. You're one of their athletes, and they're kind of dealing with this from a professional standpoint because it was their canopy that the lines were on that weren't being properly maintained.
Right, and that's the biggest issue. Is over the course of 5 years, there were 5 separate incidents in Dubai. Every single one of them. Again, this is Dubai. There's a lot of sand. Every single one of them, the lines were so bad that a non-skydiver would look at those and say, I wouldn't jump with those. They were so degraded that they shouldn't have been used as closing loops. I wouldn't tie my tent down with one of these things. But somehow they got jumped. And there's a theory as to what happened there, and it has a lot to do with the sort of process that Dubai may or may not use. I don't know. I've never been to Skydiving.
Is it high-performance canopy?
They're all high-performance canopies. They're all very small.
What was the jumper who passed away? What was this last one?
I'm not exactly sure what he was on. I believe he was on one of their higher performance parachutes.
So he was in a turn.
He was in a turn,
which is gonna increase the abrasion, but also the tension that's on there. Exactly. On an abrased line. Yes. Tension increase. Yeah. And we have a line break in one of the dives that we just saw you doing right there, and it just the line gave out, and it broke, and
unfortunately, when you're doing those kinds of turns, the highest amount of G-forces is about as low to the ground as you're going to get. So it's right as you finish turning, that's the most amount of G-force you're going to build up. So if you've got an abraded line, an old line, and it's on the edge, that's where it's unfortunately usually going to happen. It's either going to happen on opening or it's going to happen there. And it's not the only time. This has happened to other manufacturers and other parachutes throughout the years. I had lines break on a different manufactured canopy from a different company a few years ago for the exact same reason. I knew the lines were right on the edge. I wasn't turning. I just opened the parachute, and 4 of the A lines broke. 4 of the lines on the nose broke on opening. I got lucky it happened there. But they were right on the edge, and I knew they were on the edge, and I pushed them. That's the exact same thing that happened out there. Those lines were abraded. They were worn. They needed to be replaced. Every single incident that occurred out there was on a wing loading above 2.0, so relatively high, and they were on lines that had over 200 skydives on them in a sandy environment. That's a lot. Yeah. That's a lot, and those things need to be addressed. The parachute manufacturer did its stuff. That's hate, and I don't understand the hate that comes along with that. What did they do to you, man? They're out here building some cool stuff, and they're still actively building cool stuff. And they feel it. When you talk to them about it, you can tell it weighs on them because this thing happened with one of their pieces of equipment. It has nothing to do with them, but they still don't want loss of life. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, that's the worst part of this. And you've experienced that as well. And recently one of your students.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one of my students did have an issue and ended up passing away while going through the process. And it had nothing to do with the parachute. It had nothing to do with the lines. It had nothing to do with the situation. Things sometimes happen. In that particular instance, the incident report came back. I don't have the video. I don't want to watch the video, but it's required by the SNTA community, the Safety and Training Advisor community, as well as the U.S. Parachute Association, and maybe even the FAA to do an investigation. The investigation came back and said basically something happened. It was one of those incidents. It's just an accident, pure and simple.
Was she doing a 270?
She was doing a 270, yeah. She was going through the training process, and unfortunately these accidents happen right around that period of time, and it's devastating. Regardless of why it happened or how it happened, it's devastating for everybody involved. It's unpleasant, and it's not something we want to see happen. And so that's why I educate myself on these things, and that's why I encourage people, if you're coming to me as a coach, go seek out other coaches. They might know better than I do. I might know better than they do on one specific thing. But it's so important that knowledge and that information be shared, right? The whole reason my business is called Gatekeeper Canopy Coaching is because it has to be shared. We need a gatekeeper because that information can't just be out there willy-nilly for anybody.
Yeah.
You have to feed it out to people in a training environment safely and correctly. But when it comes to lines and materials and fabrics and all that kind of stuff, it's readily available. It's all out there on the internet. This has been going on for years. This is nothing new. And it's available for people to research, and they really have to, because again, that zero knowledge for one knowledge is 100%, but there's so much more world out there for people to understand.
That translates over to so many different areas too. It's like even like one of my other passions is jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
Right? And we talk about it all the time on here. I had my coach was here and some other guys that have been on here, guys I've trained with. I had Rob Gutierrez on here, amazing war fighter. He's that dude, man. Every time I talk to him, I'm just like, how does your brain even work like it does? I have no idea. Genius, smart, amazing war fighter. The guy has got just massive brass balls, Get on the mat and we train. And the thing is that there are, and he's a white belt in jiu-jitsu, but there are things that he does that I'm just like, ooh, you got to show me what that was right there, right? Craig Baker, our coach, was on here, and he's just the way that his head works. I want my head to work like his does.
Right?
Does he have all the answers? In my opinion, because he's my coach, my answer would be biasly, yeah, he's got all the answers. But even he will say, like, there are some things that like Ricky Lindell does. Like, Craig's like, that's really cool, and then Ricky will show Craig. So I had Ricky Lindell on here, right, and the stuff that and they were sharing stuff back and forth, both boys, because I was watching those guys roll, which is like watching, like two titans of any industry, trade secrets, right? And it was amazing watching those guys because they weren't rolled up in so much pride that they couldn't learn from the other guy,
right? Knowing that
you never arrive in jiu-jitsu. People do not shoot 18 in golf.
Right.
And then again, and then again, and then again, and again. It's never happened as far as I know. Now, I'm not a golfer. I don't follow golf, but it would be safe to assume no one's ever done it.
I love that jiu-jitsu analogy. And part of the reason why is because you get to a stage in jiu-jitsu where you know enough to really hurt somebody, but not enough to be able to control that, where you can put them in a position to hurt them, but back it off in a way to still teach them.
Right.
The same thing happens in every sport, in every discipline, this one specifically. You get just enough information to be dangerous because you know something that you just learned last week or last year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but you never researched it, you never developed it, you never spent the time to continue on.
Right.
Now you're dangerous in your knowledge and your information, and you're passing that off as an expert when you're not.
Right.
You're a perceived expert. You're good at what you're doing, but you're not an expert.
Yep. Or in business. People, right. It's like being here. I have learned more about business in the last 8 years than I mean, it is the amount of stuff the things that you have to, so much so that I'm like, I get other business ideas. I'm in the process right now of starting 3 other businesses right now.
Right.
I am serial. I can't stop. I just can't stop. It's a problem. There's probably worse things to be addicted.
There are worse problems to be addicted to, yeah.
But the thing is that I'm taking the things I've learned here into those, right? It becomes the personality type. Right. So we're talking about the things that happen in skydiving, and you want to be that guy that's up here that's super spongy and takes everything in for all these other people, and that guy is going to go from a 1, 2, 3, 4. He's going to climb that fast because he's just like cool, because he's not operating from a position of pride,
right?
And in business, there are these guys out there that just they're like, yeah, I got it all together. Yeah, yep, cool. Well, you're maybe you haven't crashed yet, but you
will.
And when you do, how are you going to respond? Are you going to be able to get back up? Are you going to get in there again? Are you going to do it? And with jiu-jitsu, yep, you lost that round, and you lost it bad.
Yeah.
You got subbed.
Yes.
So okay, cool. So what are you going to do with that? All right, you are flying your canopy and you hit the ground really hard. Yep, you tweak something. Cool. Are you going to heal? Are you going to get back up? And are you going to do it again?
Right.
And are you going to learn from that one? Because there are 3 types of guys that are out there. They have the ones that learn from other people's experiences. That's a wise man, right? You have the guys who are going to learn from their own experiences. That's an average man.
Right.
Then you have the guy who's going to learn from no one because he's not going to be teachable.
Right.
And that is a fool. And there is a lot of guys in skydiving who had started as the fool. Then they became average because some experiences started happening. And as soon as that, then they started listening. They were like, Brian, can you help me with this? And they're going to start listening to other people who are going to speak to them from their experiences.
Right.
And that happens in every walk of life. It happens to everybody at some point. It's how fast do you get from one, how fast can you climb up there to where you're that guy who can be taught,
right?
Teachable, coachable, because that's the one that has the least chance of injury or getting dead.
I was told something very early on in my youth. I was told the man who knows everything knows that he doesn't know something. You can say you know everything, but you can't. It's impossible. You can't shoot 18 in golf. You can't know everything. But if you know that there's something you don't know, that is the most powerful thing, the most powerful piece of knowledge you can have. Because if you go, I don't know, let me go find out. I don't have all the answers, but I can go find them. I know the people who might have an answer, and we can ask somebody else, and somebody else, and somebody else. And that is the most powerful way to approach something.
Yeah. Dude, you're awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for being here.
You're the best, man.
How can people find you?
I've got a couple of different websites. Obviously, the social medias are the easiest way to go. Just Bryan Buffaloe on Facebook and Instagram. I've also
Your name's spelled funny, though.
My name is spelled funny. It's Bryan with a Y and Buffalo with an E at the end, just like the animal, but with an E at the end.
Yep.
I've also got Gatekeeper Canopy Coaching on Instagram, and Amber and I recently started Alpha Bravo Skydiving, where we're going to talk about a little bit more in the general sense of skydiving, not just the high-performance canopy coaching and not just parachute stuff specifically.
And you're going to do that on Instagram?
We're going to do that mostly on Instagram. I think Amber's got some other stuff out there we're working on as well, but Gatekeeper Canopy Coaching, Alpha Bravo Skydiving, and then just Bryan Buffaloe on Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I always like having people in here who have like interesting lives. The things that they do are just odd. We got skydiving in common.
Yeah.
But the ship driving thing, it's like it's been eye opening, and a lot of getting there. That's like man's man work too. It's and that's why I had to have you on, because I had to ask you about the Baltimore Bridge, and I wanted to do it so that we could all hear from that. But thanks for being here today, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Right on. So hey, thanks for being here for episode number 20, whatever. They're back. They're going, it's 4. Episode 24. And thanks for being here today. Thanks, Bryan Buffaloe, for being here as well. BramRadio. Stay dangerous.
Woo.